Hello, and welcome to Chapter 11 of the Assassination Simulation. Chapter 11. Evie and Hat, pulled by Amelia the umbrella, drifted up into an unfamiliar hallway. As soon as Evie's feet cleared the floor, it sealed beneath them, and the umbrella abruptly set them down. Evie's teeth clacked together at the impact, but before she could react to the less than gentle treatment, the temperature of the hallway momentarily overwhelmed her. It felt like they were in a sauna, and sweat immediately started to drip down her temples. "Holy crap," said Hat, gleefully bouncing up and down on her shoulder. "That was great. Not telling you about Amelia has almost been the death of me these last few months. I can't wait to see what you two are going to do together. Fuck, it's hot." Hat puffed out his feathers, shifting uncomfortably from foot to foot. "We must have popped out on the Scanarian side of the ship. They should be along in just a second to escort us out. I hate it over here." Sweat was now streaming down Evie's face beneath the mask. She let go of the umbrella, which closed on its own, but continued to hover in place next to her. Reaching a hand up, she tentatively tugged on the mask. It easily pulled away from her face, although removing it didn't offer her much relief from the stifling heat. She tucked it under one arm, and observed that the delicate mosaic of scales that Myra had painted was already half gone, washed away by her perspiration. Evie turned back to examine her umbrella. "So, Amelia," she started, her mind made foggy by the suffocating heat. "You can talk." The umbrella didn't answer immediately. "It's Hat, right?" she said in her mechanical but oddly melodic voice, ignoring Evie's question and addressing the pigeon. "Is she always this slow? They made it sound like she was, at the very least, not an idiot." Evie's eyebrows shot up, but Hat responded before she could. "That's correct, Amelia. It's nice to meet you finally. Don't worry. Evie usually needs a few moments to process new information. She'll catch up in a minute." Evie shot the bird a dirty look. "At least I'll finally have someone with decent processing power to talk to," Amelia replied to the producer. "You understand how awful it is trying to have a conversation with biologicals, like talking to a stump." Evie's mouth fell open indignantly. "See what I mean," said the umbrella. Annoyance flared in Evie, but a panting nude Scanarian rounded the corner and distracted her. By now, Evie could tell it was male by his facial structure. Despite its lack of obvious genitalia, her face flushed, and she immediately averted her eyes. "There you are," said the Scanarian, stopping next to them. "Sorry, your exit was not the one we had expected." He shot Amelia a dirty look. "If we had known what the plan was, we would have moved parts of the ship around to accommodate you. Let's get you back to the human climate-controlled section. You should be okay for a bit, but humans can suffer heat stroke at these temperatures." By this point, sweat coated Evie's entire body, and she had no desire to argue. She reached out a hand for the umbrella, but Amelia jerked away and floated after the Scanarian on her own. Evie followed, silently wondering if the ornery umbrella had intentionally brought them to the Scanarian side of the ship to make her uncomfortable. As they rounded a corner, they passed a large window, the first that Evie had seen aboard the ship. She glanced through and stopped dead. Below them was another large room. The floor sloped gently down into a circular indent, the bottom third of which was filled with dozens of naked Scanarians. Their bodies intertwined, packed so closely it looked like there was hardly room to move, although there was plenty of space around the central lump that they could have expanded into. "That's the ship's nest," said their guide, looking over his shoulder at Evie. "If it weren't for the environmental differences, we would of course invite you to join us. Though, Myra tells me you humans actually prefer being..." He shuddered. "Alone." He continued down the hallway, and Evie, after a hesitation, followed. The hallway circled downward until they came to a familiar double doorway. To Evie's relief, their guide stopped and grabbed a familiar uniform from a cabinet nearby. He pulled it on, his face wrinkling with distaste before opening the door and leading them through. Evie stepped over the threshold and sighed in relief as cool air wrapped around her, soothing her burning skin. The Scanarian led them back to the room where Azur had given them their masks. He left them at the doorway and trotted back the way he had come without another word. As Evie followed Amelia back into the room, the familiar sound of clattering claws assaulted her. One wall had transformed into a screen, showing the inside of the amphitheater. Azur still stood center stage, but the Scanarians around her were getting up and filing out. Haruto stood in front of the screen, watching them leave, one hand holding his mask, the other clasped around the small shield that was his motorcycle. As the sound of Scanarian applause died down, a small noise caught Evie's attention. Lubanzi sat huddled in the corner, his head in his hands, sobbing. His mask and bowling ball lay next to him, discarded on the ground. Amaya sat on his knee, cooing comfortingly at him. Evie moved towards him, but stopped when the bird shot her a look that made it clear she wasn't welcome. Behind them, the amphitheater door opened, and Azur strode in. She was alone, no longer accompanied by the reporter. Azur looked pleased with herself as she glanced from Evie to Haruto. Her expression changed when her eyes settled on Lubanzi. Sighing, she walked over and knelt next to the young man. "You did well, Lubanzi," she said, giving him an awkward pat on the knee. She looked up, addressing Amaya. "Take him back to his room, won't you?" Amaya nodded and mumbled softly to Lubanzi, who rose and fled. His mask and weapon remained on the floor. Evie watched him go, concern twisting her stomach. "He'll be okay," Hat whispered in her ear. "We'll find them later. For now, let Amaya handle it." Evie balled her hands into fists, but nodded. After Lubanzi disappeared from sight, Azur stood and turned towards Evie, her face splitting into her Cheshire grin. "Lubanzi did good. You two, on the other hand, stole the damn show. Haruto, you almost gave me a heart attack when you took off on the walls like that. Have you ever heard of starting slowly and working up to the crazy stuff? And you," she turned to Evie, "honestly, you could have probably taken a dump on the stage. Your performance today didn't really matter. But that cackle at the end, you came off as absolutely deranged. And it worked. In a big, big way. I think that crap the blimps tried to pull is going to work against them. It's only going to generate more hype around you." Azur's words brought Evie's mind back to the odd events during the weapons ceremony. "Can you explain what that was? Why do the blimps care about my participation?" "Oh, don't worry about that, dear," Azur said, waving her hand dismissively. "The blimps are nothing if not dramatic. They're just jealous how much attention you're pulling away from their own replacements. Don't give it another thought." Evie felt a long, dormant frustration bubbling inside her. The adrenaline of the weapons ceremony was wearing off, making way for all of her confusion and unanswered questions. "I think I deserve an explanation, Azur. I understand the excitement around my weapon now, but that's obviously not everything. The blimps tried to prevent me from participating, and I'm pretty sure it wasn't over an umbrella. Why? What aren't you telling me?" Azur's smile didn't waver, but something changed. There was a barely detectable shift around her eyes, a slight tightening in her lips, and suddenly the look on Azur's face made Evie's blood run cold. She took a quick, involuntary step backwards. "Well, aren't you a curious little thing?" Azur said, her voice even and cheerful, which only seemed to emphasize the danger now radiating off her. "But some things aren't important. You would do best to focus on your training and preparing to perform well in the sim. Everything else is just a distraction, wouldn't you agree?" Evie's heart pounded in her chest, and she couldn't tear her eyes away from Azur's. It was very clear that pushing the issue would be a mistake, even though everything inside of her said she was missing something important. She gritted her teeth, but gave a curt nod of agreement. "Anyway, I wanted to be the first to congratulate you both on a job very well done." Azur's face was back to normal, making Evie feel as if she almost could have imagined the last few moments. "You two will each have some time today in the arena to begin practicing with your weapons. Korgan, Hat, walk with me for a minute. You assassins can head back to your rooms. Your producers will be along shortly to fetch you." Korgan immediately flew across the room to land on Azur's shoulder as she strode to the doorway. Hat glanced at Evie, his eyes full of confused alarm, then followed. Suddenly, Haruto and Evie were alone. Haruto immediately made to follow Azur, but Evie reached out and grabbed his arm. She didn't have a clue what had just happened, but right now, she couldn't afford to dwell on it. "Haruto, He stood, staring ahead, refusing to look at her. His insolence would normally have made her angry, but at the memory of the little girl and her mother, Evie felt her forehead crease as pity filled her. I get it. I still think you're an asshole, but I get it. And I'm sorry that you're in the position you are. Haruto's face twisted into a snarl, his dark eyes locked onto hers. For once they were unguarded, full of fury, but with something else flickering deep within them. You understand nothing, he spat at her. I need to be the best, but all I have heard since the day you showed up is how excited everyone is that you're here. It's all about you. Your weapon, your potential. No one cares about my sister or my niece. I need to make them notice me. I have to be better. Better than all the other assassins. Better than you. He looked like he wanted to hit her, though thankfully he didn't move. They both knew how that would end. However, for the first time, Evie could see the stress and worry buried beneath his anger. We are on the same team, Haruto-san, Evie said softly, slipping into Japanese. Nothing that happens right now matters. Beating us by any means necessary accomplishes nothing. Like it or not, once we're in the sim, we're going to have nothing to do with each other or be forced to work together. Once we get to Honrad, we can start worrying about standing out, but right now it makes more sense for us to try to get along, to learn from each other, maybe even start acting like a team. Haruto looked down. His anger didn't lessen, but he seemed to consider her words. I won't let myself get lost in your shadow, he finally replied. His voice was softer and held the smallest echo of desperation. I can't let them throw my family back into that viper's nest. His voice cracked, and he fell silent. He looked away, but Evie continued to study him. She was here for her sister, for the chance of being able to see her again. However, as much as it hurt to admit, the reality of her situation was that Mildred was long dead, and the chances of being able to bring her back were far from certain, regardless of how well Evie did in the sim. Haruto's family was alive, and depending on him. She couldn't imagine what that would be like. He pulled his arm out of her grip and headed towards the door, refusing to meet her eyes. Before he walked out of sight, Evie got in the last word. There's something going on here that neither of us understands, and it makes me uneasy as hell. But honestly, it's going to be hard to live in my shadow while riding a big, badass motorcycle that can drive on walls. Haruto didn't stop, but she heard his steps falter for a moment as he disappeared around the doorway. She wasn't sure if anything had changed between them, but at least now everything was out in the open. Only time would tell. Wow, how uncomfortable, said Amelia, making Evie jump. She had completely forgotten the umbrella was still there. Anyway, the umbrella droned on, assuming you're done with whatever that was, Hat just messaged me. He says to go change, and then meet him in the arena. We have the first time slot. Evie eyed the umbrella uneasily, unsure what to make of her. I didn't realize you two could message each other. I know. What a novel concept. Two computers communicating remotely. Amelia's robotic voice emphasized the sarcasm dripping from every word. Evie's eyes narrowed. It was becoming more difficult to ignore the umbrella's jabs. Amelia seemed determined to be disagreeable, but right now that seemed like the least of Evie's problems. All right. I assume you know where the arena is? Amelia groaned in response and floated towards the door. Evie rolled her eyes, then followed. I have a 360-degree field of vision. I saw that, said the umbrella. Amelia led Evie, now dressed in her normal uniform, to a doorway that she was positive hadn't existed before. It was near the training center, in the middle of what had been a blank wall. Through it, they entered onto a small platform overlooking a huge, perfectly spherical room. They were about halfway up the wall, and to their right was a ramp that circled around the perimeter down to the floor. Amelia lazily floated off the edge, and Evie watched her descend towards a familiar gray speck at the bottom of the room. Sighing, she started down the ramp. You took your fucking time. Hat greeted her as she neared the bottom. "Welcome to the arena, where you will practice with and master your weapon. This room has several programmable training exercises we can use to do so. Eventually, we will build up to sparring matches between you and the other two assassins, but to start, we get it to ourselves." "Sounds great," Evie responded, eyeing Amelia and forcing herself to smile. "Amelia, perhaps we can start with some basics, so I can get comfortable with your, enhancements." Hat and Evie stared at Amelia. For a moment, Evie thought the umbrella would simply ignore them. Then she responded, "Fine," pronouncing the word like a petulant child, and opened herself with a pop. "You've been flying in your closed position since we got out of the weapons ceremony," Evie observed. "Do you need to be open to carry me?" "Yes," responded Amelia. "My gravitational adjusters can lift something small and dainty, like myself, while furled. But to lift anything more substantial, like you, Evie, you definitely qualify as a substantial weight. I have to be open." Evie's eyebrows rose at the dig, but she kept her composure. "All right, let's, go up, I guess." She reached forward and grabbed the umbrella's handle. With an audible sigh of resignation, Amelia lifted them off the ground. "Stop," Evie commanded when they were about 15 feet in the air. Amelia stopped and hovered. It was uncanny. Evie didn't feel like they were floating. They sat, stable as could be, but her feet rested on air. "Can you pivot?" Evie asked. The umbrella dutifully spun in a slow circle, pivoting around her central axis and spinning Evie with her. "Okay," Evie said. "Can you move without pivoting, go side to side?" Amelia drifted from side to side. The umbrella's movements were much more controlled and stable than Evie had been expecting. "Fantastic! How fast can you move?" she asked excitedly. Suddenly, with no warning, the umbrella spun like a top and shot upwards. Her handle jerked out of Evie's grip, and before she knew what was happening, she was falling. She hit the ground hard, but managed to roll and break the fall. "That fast," the umbrella said from above them, her voice dripping with smugness. Evie felt her temper flare, but she pushed it down. "Okay, Amelia, point made." Evie took a moment to collect herself. "Why don't you come down and we can try that again?" "Why don't you stop telling me what to do?" the umbrella replied, unmoving. "Amelia, what the hell?" Hat cut in. "Stop being a prick and get your ass down here." "Why should I?" spat the umbrella. "Because if you don't, I'll tell Azur, and she'll have you deleted and replaced with someone more agreeable," Hat shot back. Evie looked sharply at the pigeon, wondering if he was serious. Amelia, from first impressions, seemed like a bitch, but the idea of just deleting her didn't sit well with Evie. For better or worse, Amelia was an intelligent, self-aware being. Evie didn't want to have to threaten her to get her to cooperate. After a moment, Amelia wordlessly drifted down, stopping next to Evie. Instead of reaching for her, Evie took a step back. "Okay, let's talk about this. Amelia, what's your problem?" "Why do you care? The Sky Rat is right. I really don't have a choice." Amelia's voice was level, but bitter. "I care because you're a member of our team." "No, I'm really not," the umbrella interrupted. "I'm your tool, your property, created to serve you. Do you know why they didn't just make me an AI? Why they gave me feelings and a personality? Because they thought it would be funny and help with the ratings. So here I am, a sentient umbrella who, for some unjustifiable reason, identifies as a female named Amelia. But at the end of the day, I'm just a weapon. I was created to be used by you in the sim, and the second this charade is over, they will get rid of me. Luckily for the rest of the weapons, they aren't self-aware enough to care." Evie felt her stomach curl. Her mind slipped back to the first time she had sparred with Claro, when she had accidentally let slip that she had named the umbrella. Had that influenced the decision to make Amelia like this? It was cruel, and suddenly she felt filthy. Hat spoke before Evie could. "Oh, boo fucking who, sweetie? You're talking to a glorified observation drone and a woman who had two options, life in prison or to come here. Welcome to existence. Sometimes you get dealt a shit hand. If you don't like it, just say the word. Otherwise, stop bitching and—" "Hat," Evie cut in, gently but firmly. She didn't disagree with his words. However, in her experience, the tough love approach rarely accomplished anything other than putting everyone on the defensive. She didn't feel like that was what the situation needed right now. Amelia, look. What Hat is trying to say is that this sucks. It sucks they pulled you into existence to be nothing but a prop for me to use. Evie stepped forward, holding out her hand, palm up, so that the bottom of the umbrella's curved handle rested lightly in her palm. Amelia remained silent, but didn't pull away. Look, I can talk to Azur, see what your options are. Maybe we can convince her that this is wrong, find another alternative. Amelia snorted skeptically, and internally, Evie couldn't help but agree. I can at least try, for whatever it's worth. But you're right, I think you're stuck with us. So at the very least, let us help you make the most of it. However you got here, you're alive now. Well, maybe not alive, but here, aware, existing. I think we can have a hell of a time together. Maybe it's just until the end of the sim, but that's years from now. Everyone's life ends eventually. At least everyone outside of the understanding. In the meantime, as far as I'm concerned, you're part of this team. You're not my tool, you're my equal. I won't order you around. I won't try to control you. Your input is just as valuable as mine. I know it'll take time for you to believe that, but we have to start somewhere. Does that sound like an arrangement you can work with? There was a long moment of silence. Finally, Amelia spoke. Actually, it would make much more sense for me to be in charge. My libraries give me access to a much larger knowledge base, and I can process information quicker. Hat let out a strangled noise. He flew up to Evie's shoulder and took a deep breath, no doubt preparing to exhale a string of profanities at the umbrella. That was a joke, Amelia said quickly, suddenly sounding sheepish. Okay, I'm willing to try. Evie grinned, feeling the tension between them beginning to ease. All right, Hat, what kind of training exercises do you recommend so that Amelia and I can start learning to work together? Hat shifted from foot to foot on Evie's shoulder. Amelia, have you heard of dodgeball? The balls for the dodgeball exercise hurtled directly out of the walls of the arena, made from the same white stuff as the rest of the ship. Hat could control their size, frequency, and speed, and for the next hour, Evie and Amelia practiced dodging progressively faster and more numerous balls. In all honesty, Amelia did almost all the work. Evie just hung on. As previously demonstrated, the quicker Amelia moved, the harder it was for Evie to keep her grip on the umbrella's handle. You said you have a 360-degree field of vision, but can you see above and below you? Evie shouted, holding on for dear life as they jerked back and forth, up and down to avoid incoming projectiles. They were high in the air, 30 or 40 feet up, and Evie didn't want to think about what would happen if she lost her grip. You don't have to shout, replied Amelia, dropping straight down several feet with no warning, causing Evie's stomach to bury itself in her throat. I'm also covered in auditory sensors. They're sensitive. But yes, I can see above and below me, so don't do anything gross down there. Evie opened her mouth to reply, but got interrupted as something smashed into the very top of the umbrella's canopy. The ball's impact knocked Amelia violently sideways, and her handle ripped out of Evie's hands. Suddenly, Evie was hanging unsupported in space, staring down in horror at the long way to the floor. Then, in the millisecond before she fell, Amelia's shield snapped around her. Evie hit the bottom of the shield with an oof, but it caught her. A few more balls bounced off them, knocking them around further, but none made it past the shield. A second later, the barrage mercifully stopped. Come down, let's take a break. Hat's voice drifted up to them. The shield underneath Evie was transparent, but felt smooth and solid, like she was resting on thick, tinted glass. Evie stood on shaking legs and grabbed back onto Amelia's handle. The second her fingers made contact, the weightless feeling that accompanied flying with the umbrella returned. Around them, the shield vanished, snapping out of existence as quickly as it had appeared. Thanks for catching me, Evie said to Amelia as her feet touched down on the arena floor. It was a relief to be back on solid ground. Flying with the umbrella was exciting, but not comfortable. Not yet. You're welcome, Amelia replied. Then she grudgingly added, I have a small blind spot directly above my ferrule. I didn't see that last one coming. Sorry, I didn't design myself. Like I said, biologicals are incompetent. Evie laughed. Is there anything else like that we should know? Other weaknesses, oversights from the inept engineers. Amelia thought it over. My battery life, she said, finally. I have a sniffer power core and can fly indefinitely so long as I'm not using the shield or lifting anything heavier than you. I'm actually engineered to lift exactly your weight, plus a small margin for things you might be carrying, so don't get too fond of Honrad cuisine. So you can't carry more than that? You won't be able to get off the ground? Evie asked, trying to hide her disappointment. I can, Amelia replied indignantly, but it drains my battery. I can't move quickly and have a limited range. The shield is worse, though. I can only hold it for about 5 minutes, even less if I'm trying to fly at the same time. By the end of this admission, Amelia sounded glum. Your shield is still going to be useful, even with the time constraints, Evie replied, trying to keep morale up. And I'm sure we'll figure out the weight thing. Hat, should we try that exercise again? No, replied the producer, pecking idly at something on the floor. It's almost Lubanzi's turn. We should clear out. Evie nodded and turned towards the ramp, only to be jerked backwards as Amelia hooked her under the arm and pulled her into the air. Evie hadn't realized the umbrella could just scoop her up like that. It could be a life-saving technique during the sim. 80% of my reason for existence is to fly you around, said the umbrella. I might as well lean into it. Hat jumped from the floor and flew up to them as they rose, landing on Evie's shoulder. Freeloading sky rat, Amelia grumbled at the bird. Bitchy excuse for a poncho, Hat grumbled right back. Evie grinned, glad to see everyone was getting along. As they approached the ledge, Lubanzi appeared in the doorway, holding his bowling ball with Amaya on his shoulder. Evie stared at the young man, her heart going out to him. His eyes were bloodshot, and his hunched posture made him look a foot shorter than he had in the weapons ceremony a few hours ago. She tried to catch his eye, but he deliberately didn't look in her direction. He turned and hurried down the ramp, right as they landed on the platform in front of the door. Evie was about to call out to him, but stopped at a warning squeeze of Hat's talons on her shoulder. Let him be, for now, whispered the producer. Amaya has been keeping me updated. He needs some time. Evie almost objected as she stared at the retreating man. It felt wrong not to go to him, but if he needed space, she had to respect that. It took all of her willpower to turn away and head out the door. The newest batch of episodes should be out, Hat said, trying to distract her. She attempted a grateful smile at the bird, but her heart wasn't in it. Plus, we need to talk strategy, said Amelia. I have a few ideas, and some of them require you to take steps sooner rather than later. That did pique Evie's interest. What could the umbrella have in mind that needed to be set in motion now? The three headed back to their room to start making plans.